Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scot McKay.
Greetings, gentlemen. Welcome yet again to another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. I am your host, Scot McKay. You can find me all over social media, usually by using my name, all as one word, Scot McKay, SCOTMCKAY. Our website, as always, is mountaintoppodcast.com. Guess what, gentlemen? I just recently revamped that website, and you can find a whole lot of new free goodies up there, including, for the first time ever, my first book that usually goes for $37 all day long on my website, called Deserve What You Want. And also, guys, if you haven't joined our Facebook group yet, it's called the Mountaintop Summit. You're invited. You're invited to join all of us, a group of guys who are getting better as men and getting better with women. It's a good group of guys, and it's a group unlike anything you've ever seen on Facebook before. Let's just leave it at that. Gentlemen, today we're going to have a whole lot of fun. I've been wanting to do this show for a long time. I just needed the right guest to have this conversation with. That guest comes in the form of my good friend Jonathon Aslay from Hollywood, California, as it turns out. He's out there in L.A. And so he's right there in the thick of it socially with all the Hollywood actors and actresses and directors. He sees them walking up and down the street all the time, I'm sure. And he's with us today to have what promises to be a very fun conversation about how Hollywood portrays men and women on the silver screen, and I guess on the small screen too. So without anything further, Jonathon Aslay from California, welcome, man.
Hey, buddy, how you doing?
Hey, it's great to have you here. You know, I just mentioned something in passing that I'd love to actually formally ask you about. You live out there in Los Angeles. Do you or do you not, when you're walking around, constantly see people you recognize from some TV show or movie somewhere? Even
Let's just say, no. It does happen frequently, especially when I'm out at restaurants and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, my dad used to work in New York City all the time, and there's nobody better on earth at spotting famous people than my dad. I mean, I would say half the famous people I've ever seen in my life, it happened to have been when my dad was with me to spot them for me. He's just amazing at it. So he would work in New York when I was a kid and come home and tell us about the famous people he saw walking down the street and what they were doing that was funny or silly. And true to form, every time Emily and I go to Los Angeles ourselves, or even New York, but we find ourselves in Los Angeles more often, we always see, quote unquote, that guy from that thing. It's someone we know is famous. We just can't place their name. But
I get what you mean. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I was at the Hollywood Bowl the other night. I'm going again tomorrow night. And, I was driving through Grauman's Theater off of, Santa Monica Boulevard, which is famous. Sure. And I saw the TMZ tour bus truck. And I thought, it might be a fun thing to do. My girlfriend and I was just thinking, to do the, like the tour of the stars' homes, that sort of thing. And I was just telling her about it. I go, we should do that just for fun.
Isn't it interesting how you can live in a metro area and never do the tourist things in your hometown, even though you've done the tourist things everywhere else on the entire planet? Like here, we have the Tower of the Americas, that big, Space Needle Tower. I've never been to the top of it, and I've lived here for 20 years. Yeah.
So anyway, I was even at the bowl the other night, and I saw a number of famous people sitting next to me. Thankfully, my best friend is rather wealthy, and he has the front box literally on stage. So I'm kind of blessed in that way.
Wow. Where can I find a friend like that?
35 years in the making, him and I.
Very good. Very good. Anyway, my good friend, we are indeed talking about dating and relationships as portrayed in Hollywood, probably in Bollywood too. The Indian movies, I suppose the Korean movies. Everybody who makes movies, filmmakers everywhere, loves to focus on the relationships between men and women. And two observations to kind of kick off this whole conversation, Jonathon, is first of all, Hollywood filmmakers in general have an uncanny knack for properly representing how men and women interact. The good, the bad, and the ugly of it, they've got it figured out. Second of all, and this is fascinating to me, Jonathon, is most of the guys listening to this have never seen most of the movies that are the best examples of exactly what we're talking about, because those kind of movies typically appeal to women. You know, they're the rom-coms.
Well, Scott, I want to jump in. You believe that they accurately represent how men and women act? Because I have an observation that's completely different.
Well, do tell. Tell me.
So, well, here's why, and I was excited to talk to you about this, because, you know, I think Hollywood actually does a poor representation of men and women. Because oftentimes, like to some degree, you know, they have the Brad Pitts of the world, the Angelina Jolies, that sort of thing, which, you know, from a physical aesthetics perspective, they represent the small percentage of the population that actually happens to be attractive, the Ryan Goslings, that sort of thing out in the world. And while they do sometimes, you know, suppose that the nerd, if you will, and I'm only going to mention this movie, not that your audience has seen it or not, Revenge of the Nerds, the nerdy guy will get the great looking cheerleader, you know, if he does everything right. I think actually Hollywood doesn't truly portray people in, you know, to some degree in their true humanity. And what I mean to say is the average human being has childhood wounds and traumas and adult traumas that actually causes them to have poor emotional maturity and relationship skills. And I think Hollywood, you know, kind of portrays human beings at being good at communication skills, at being good, like I flub my words on occasion. Well, Hollywood doesn't flub their words because it's all scripted for them. So I don't believe it's a good representation of the way relationships are. There is one movie that comes close in my mind for the over 40 category. And again, I suspect your audience hasn't seen this, but it's called This Is 40 with, I can't think of the actor's name, the guy who played the Ant-Man in one of the Marvel movies. And I only mention this as it actually talks about the dysfunctionality of relationships, you kind of in real life, versus what I think we see in Hollywood. That's my perception of Hollywood anyway.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you that there are idealized human beings on the silver screen, and their relationships are also similarly idealized. And indeed, in lots of different movies, the storyline is so fantastic in the true sense of the word that, you know, it couldn't possibly come to pass in real life. You mentioned Brad Pitt. One of his movies that comes immediately to mind is World War Z, which is a fantasy zombie movie like none other. Yeah. And he has a very deep relationship with his wife, but the circumstances involving the heroism in that movie is literally science fiction. And I think that warps the sense of what the reality of their relationship as a man and woman who are in love with each other is compared to the storyline. And that could really mess with people's minds if they're trying to decode something like how Hollywood is representing male-female relationships. Is that what you kind of mean?
Yeah, well, there's that, but also no disrespect to anyone, but, you know, and I love that movie, by the way.
Oh, I do too. It's amazing.
His wife, I guarantee you, Brad Pitt would have never married that woman based on just purely, you know, physical attraction basis, because she was considerably less attractive than him. So I doubt Brad Pitt would have married that woman. No, again, and that's a judgment on my part. But and then if they casted a gorgeous woman like a Scarlett Johansson or whatnot, it just would have been a little over at the top. So I get it. But I'm differentiating between reality and the way Hollywood portrays reality. And I honestly believe Hollywood has a skewed perspective on how they portray reality these days. Especially, and I shouldn't say this, but even from a political perspective these days.
Well, for sure. And I mean, that's Hollywood's job, is to give us a fantasy representation. So, I mean, notwithstanding the crazy storylines and what happens in the midst of them, I would say that despite the socio-political messaging surrounding masculinity and femininity, for example, masculinity is a social construct, the whole brouhaha about even defining what a woman is, etc., you can still go to the movies and see good old-fashioned, primal, masculine, feminine attraction at work. And typically in Hollywood, regardless of the movie, and I mean, this goes for movies made in India, South Korea, et cetera, masculine men attract feminine women, and the sexual spark is accurately portrayed. In other words, guys who don't have any game are typically not getting the women. Guys who know how to turn women on by igniting their femininity with natural masculinity typically are the ones, my wife and I talk about this, by the way, are the ones the audience is rooting for to get the girl at the end. There are movies where you really want to throw rotten vegetables at the screen because the wrong guy gets the girl. But a lot of times that's by design because it's part of the plot. A movie that jumps out in my mind as being representative of that is an old movie from about 1997 called Reality Bites with Ethan Hawke and Winona Ryder.
Ben Stiller, yeah.
You know, that movie is not trying to portray something fantastic, but is actually attempting in its very storyline to demonstrate, the angst and the plight of Generation Xers in that particular era. And everybody who's watching that movie is rooting for cute, sweet little Winona Ryder to end up with Ben Stiller, because Ben Stiller is actually trying to do right by her. He's charming. He's going to make something of himself. And frankly, Ethan Hawke's character is a slacker and not a very nice guy. And at the end, she rejects Ben Stiller and ends up with Ethan Hawke, and they're making out and this, that, and the other. And everybody's just asking, why? Well, because the movie is about young people making bad decisions. That's what the whole movie's about. So in that case, it accurately represents how women can fall for the bad boy who's really not right for her because, well, frankly, in this movie specifically, she's suffering from a self-esteem issue. I mean, that's kind of true to form.
Well, let me jump in. So
even if perfectly scripted, by the way.
Yeah. So that's a movie from the 90s. Let's now fast forward, because I think today we are in a completely different dynamic when it comes to men and women connecting with each other, because these days, most often we're meeting total strangers. Unlike the past, where you actually met people organically, and that movie was prior to the internet dating, phenomena that occurred. Today, what's happening with male and female interaction is it's most of the time happening through an online connection. So additionally, what's happening is if you're not representing yourself at, your tip-top best, if you will, if you have a mediocre dating profile, whether you're a man or a woman, you are not going to get swiped these days, okay? And that's just the first step in connecting with someone. We have to get, then you have to interact with someone. And coincidentally, we human beings weren't designed to communicate with our thumbs. I know the Gen Zs and such, they're used to flipping their thumbs a mile a minute, but they're not, because communication, 80% of communication is nonverbal. It's your facial gestures, it's your pheromones, it's your hand movements and such like that. So we're not really connecting in a healthy way these days. And since we're meeting total strangers, it's even more difficult and by the way, there's an article that came out recently in the Psychology Today called The Rise of Lonely Men. Men in particular aren't experiencing the same type of connection I know I did growing up in the 80s and 90s, because we're not interacting face to face. So if you, as you said earlier, being at the top of your game, yeah, if you're, no disrespect, but if you don't have the skill set to interact with people, if you don't have the looks and you don't have the bank account, it's becoming increasingly harder to connect these days.
That article that you're talking about, someone flagged that, got my attention with it, and I actually put that on my Facebook group, and we talked about it at length.
Yeah.
That particular article, if it's the same one, assumes everybody's meeting online nowadays. It skews heavily towards online dating as really your only option out there to meet anybody, which is an interesting dynamic post-COVID, because we were all locked down for 2 years. And It's a well-traveled point on this show that people kind of got into the habit of being locked down and getting all their quote-unquote socialization from social media. And I think movies, if anything, nowadays represent kind of an escape from that. And yet it's still vicarious, and I can watch someone else have this adventure without having to actually risk anything like getting hurt or getting an STD or making someone pregnant or having to touch another human being and talk to them myself.
You said something earlier and just now, the escape. Hollywood is the escape.
Yes.
Well, the reality of life is we can't, here's my thought, is by escaping life, you're setting yourself up for failure. And let me give you an example. You mentioned earlier the fantasy. Well, for the longest time, the fantasy used to be Cinderella. And what happens is if you buy into the fantasy and you are completely immersed in the fantasy as a human being, especially women in the Cinderella, looking for the Prince Charming, the best family, the most money, and the best looks, you're setting yourself up for failure. And what I mean to say is you're less likely to get what you want. You'll feel like you settled, and then you'll even be more depressed over this. The fantasy. And listen, I love movies. I'm a big movie fan, and I could certainly recite a number of movies, and I can even use some examples of where I think Hollywood got it right to some degree. Today, that's the past. I think today, Hollywood is not giving a real, true representation. And by setting up for the escape or the fantasy, it's just going to cause even a greater rise of lonely men and women.
All right, so let's go back in the past and then fast forward to the future.
Okay.
I'll bite. I'll play along.
Okay.
We go back to the old school movies. You've got Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn stuck on a boat together somewhere in Africa.
Yeah.
You know, African Queen. The whole movie is a dynamic between these two people, a man and a woman, who start off, I don't know, in kind of a business-like relationship, and it turns romantic by the time they're done floating down the river. And, you know, fast forward about 15, 20 years, you've got gorgeous Liz Taylor in her prime and probably an equally handsome Paul Newman in his prime being completely dysfunctional as a couple for the entire movie Cat on a Hot Tin Roof.
I was there.
You know, you have Liz Taylor again in the movie Giant with Rock Hudson, and he just doesn't know how to treat a lady. And she goes from being a wimpy East Coast chick to basically being the matriarch of this ranch. And that's a movie where the woman really influences him to be a better man despite himself. And juxtaposed alongside that, you have what I would argue to be James Dean's best performance ever as a completely boorish, sad excuse for a guy who knows how to treat a lady. And, of course, it's an epic movie and it shows everybody's evolution over the course of decades. So there are these examples in movies where there's dysfunction, but the masculine feminine dance is intact. And I think that's something people always look for and enjoy. And it sells tickets, especially to women. Now, if you go fast forward, indeed, you mentioned how people are meeting each other online. When that was a nascent curiosity, you had movies like You Got Mail, which is 1998. Okay. I mean, this is when they still had http:// on the front of URLs and television.
Floppy disks and everything else. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got cute, adorable little Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks. And my God, if they don't finally meet each other by the end of the movie, you're just going to, commit hara-kiri. And it's kind of a romanticized view of online dating. Move forward, 16 years, and you got a somewhat obscure-ish Miles Teller movie. Now, everybody loves Miles Teller nowadays because of The Offer and because of Top Gun Maverick. But there's a wonderful movie that's very entertaining called Two Night Stand, which I bet 10% of the guys listening to this have ever seen, where Miles Teller meets a rando chick online for a hookup, for a booty call. And she just needs to get laid, and he's up for it. And all the modern complications exist in this movie. Like, he's actually got a girlfriend, and he's cheating on her. And what happens is, the beauty of this movie is they get snowed in overnight during their one-night stand, and she can't leave in the morning, even though she's trying to sneak out. So they end up being marooned together in his apartment for 2 days, and they can't stand each other socially. They just needed to get laid. And they have no idea who the other person is. And I think that movie does a fantastic job of demonstrating the dilemma that is two strangers meeting each other potentially, no thanks to the vapidity and superficiality of modern dating apps. Now, in all fairness, it's probably a bit unrealistic how they end up falling in love in that movie. But see, that's the fantasy. That's the escape. That's what Hollywood knows we want to see happen. And it's very well acted, by the way.
Well, here's the reality of life, or at least the way I perceive it, is if you put two people together and they're actually genuine with one another, you know, the reality is two people can connect at a heart-centered level when they're in that incubator where they're being their authentic self. The reality, the way I see it, reminds me of the Chris Rock comment. He goes, in the dating process, people show up as their ambassador of their best selves.
Exactly.
What I mean to say, they're putting on a mask, they're putting on an air to try to get someone to like them instead of being their authentic self. So why that movie probably does resonate, because when you're just being who you really are at an authentic level, meaning you're vulnerable, you're authentic, you're transparent, and you're in that pressure cooker together, that's an opportunity where two hearts can actually connect with one another. Going back to the traditional, Hollywood, it's the man is the man, and the woman is the feminine, and she's even a bit more subservient to some degree or overly agreeable to the guy, making him jump through a few hoops. That's the way Hollywood is they make a guy jump through a few hoops. Ultimately, what we don't see, and this is where my perspective comes in, it's one thing to get the girl or to get the guy. That's stage one. Can these two people carry a relationship long term? Because if we look back to Hollywood, or if we look back to relationships up until about the 60s or the 70s, we've seen a huge rise in divorce. Well, why is that? Well, maybe people don't know how to actually get along with one another. They don't have the skills, the emotional maturity, and the relationship skills to actually sustain a relationship past the getting period. So in a lot of Hollywood movies, it's just stage one. Well, that's great for the fantasy, but what about keeping a relationship? And since we see well over a 50%, there's roughly a 50% divorce rate these days for people who've gotten married. And also, I bet you the other half that are still married, half of those people are miserable. So what does that say? It's easy. Maybe it's Hollywood makes it easy to get the girl or guy, but what about keeping the relationship? And that's where I, as a coach, focus my attention to be aware of that in the process of who you're going to choose.
Well, for sure, you and I are both coaches who have good heads on our shoulders about relationships. I mean, we're coaching men and women to find true love and to have something that lasts, not have a revolving door of women we're notching our bedpost with. Fair enough. Okay. I would argue, however, that there's a movie in Hollywood for every occasion. I mean, nowadays, with so many movies having been made, it is a struggle for a Hollywood producer to come up with an original storyline. So basically, we've seen it all at this point. While I would agree 1,000% that there are more than our fair share of movies which are all about early stage meet cute relationship stuff, dating stuff, there are also movies that are beloved out there, even Oscar winners, that talk about long-term relationship. The two that come to mind are On Golden Pond, right, with two obviously legendary silver screen actors, Katharine Hepburn again, and Henry Fonda, who very, very wonderfully and emotionally portray an older couple, and he's getting dementia, and she's standing by her man. And, everybody comes up to the cabin in the woods in the Adirondacks and is moved by their relationship. The shining example that is almost biblical canon in the minds of most women is The Notebook.
Yeah.
Where James Garner stands by his sweetheart till the end, even though she doesn't even know who he is anymore. And of course, the lion's share of that movie is a flashback to how they finally got together after being stupid during their younger years about all that. And, that's a movie that's beloved, particularly among women. And of course, few guys can bear to watch it.
I'm a big fan of that movie. I wonder, though, because it's Hollywood, in real life, would she have abandoned her rich, good-looking guy for him? That's I wonder about that.
You really have a cynical view on the good looks and the wealth.
Well, No, I don't have a cynical view.
You think that's what women are going for first?
Well, I would say that no, not necessarily, but I would say there's a lot of conversation out there, particularly by men, the red pill community of men, that are saying this is what these men are experiencing in the dating process. So I'm just purporting what I hear from other men. This isn't my point of view. This is what I've just observed. In fact, in the Tinder, for example, said that women on average only swipe on 4% of the profiles they view, while men swipe 60% of their profiles they view. Well, then we have to look at that and examine, why is that the case? Why do women swipe so few less people than men? I'm just reporting what I've observed. I'm not saying this is the way it should be or the way it actually is per se. I'm just reporting what I've heard.
Okay, well, two things there. First of all, the red-pilled, men going their own way guys can't stand me.
Yeah.
They need me not to exist.
Okay.
Because I'm a short little schlub who's got the most amazing, beautiful, adorable woman who's been faithful to me and has loved me for 16 years. And I dated a bunch of women who were probably, in their estimation, way out of my league before I even got to her. My comeback to all those red pill guys who are bitching and complaining about all the women is we as men are supposed to lead, and you're leading by not trusting, not liking women, and showing up with a preconceived notion that nothing good is going to come from any of your relationships with any woman. So why in the world would any woman who responds powerfully to a masculine lead and sees a man as a provider and protector and defender of her ability to be feminine to begin with, why would she saddle herself up with any guy who has that mindset to begin with? Because she's going to feel very insecure in that environment, and it's not going to turn her on sexually. So in my opinion, those guys are their own worst enemy. Therefore, they're really no different than an angry feminist woman who thinks all men are horrible, lying, cheating jerks and can't understand why she doesn't find a good boyfriend. And any guy she does find just has sex with her and kicks her to the curb. Well, I think these are all self-fulfilling prophecies. Second of all,
by the way, I'm in full agreement with you.
Okay, fair enough. Okay.
Right on board.
Yeah, those guys are their own worst enemy. And yet there's this deep, visceral satisfaction, kind of like pounding down junk food, expecting to become healthy from it as a habit, where they can find their little echo chamber and bitch and complain to each other and feel like, yeah, we really got those chicks. You know, we nailed it to them, but they're not nailing any chicks, literally or figuratively. Nobody's even listening. And the thing about the men going their own way that I find particularly amusing, and I'm sorry to use that word, but it's the fact, is that they haven't gone their own way. They're still obsessed with talking about women all the time.
And there's truth to that, too.
And you tell them that they really are the masculine reactive position against angry feminists, and they'll squeal and tell you, oh, no, we're completely different. No, you're exactly the same. That's human nature. What you're feeling, how you're reacting, how you're following, how you're capitalizing upon the victimization you feel at the hands of the other gender by blaming an entire other gender is human nature, and it's no different than what women who are angry feminists do when they're angry at men. Now let's talk about...
By the way, I want to be clear about something, at least my point of view.
Sure.
You don't have to be an angry feminist to have experienced... and by the way, my demographic that I work with is the over 40 group of people. Why I'm bringing this up is there's a significant percentage of the population, what I've observed with women, is that they've been hurt a number of times in their past relationships, and they actually carry that hurt going forward in the dating process, and they show up slightly bitter, slightly jaded. And I'm not saying that this is, a feminist point of view. This is actually a human behavior that occurs for a significant percentage of women out there. And what's happening is they're carrying that hurt going forward, and then they either make poor choices on who they choose to date or to enter in a relationship, or they sabotage relationships. This is why I am such a big proponent of personal development, self-help, spiritual work for both men and women alike to actually shore their emotional IQ, so they're actually prepared to handle the conflicts and differences that occur in relationships. Because one of the fundamentals for a successful relationship is your ability to navigate your differences between each other, good conflict resolution skills, because the fantasy is that it's all going to be perfect is not the reality of life. So I apologize. I didn't mean to criticize that. I just don't think it's angry feminists, and it's not always angry MGTOW guys that are actually struggling in meeting someone. And quite frankly, when all you have is your device to meet someone, that in and of itself is the huge problem, because you're meeting total strangers more often than not.
Well, 100%. I mean, we are certainly not going in an absolutist direction here, which I know is de rigueur on social media nowadays. It's got to be all or nothing. There's no gray area anywhere on any subject. But surely most people in general struggle to find the love of their life, and most people in general struggle to even get a date. I mean, that's why we're here. That doesn't mean every one of those people is necessarily struggling because they're angry and bitter and blaming an entire gender. No, I'm with you 100% on that.
Yeah.
I think it really comes down to angry feminists and MGTOW guys wallowing in victimhood and thinking that's great. Whereas people who have been hurt maybe feel a little jaded, a little bitter. Maybe they don't like that state of mind. Maybe they want out of it. Maybe the victimhood sucks to them and they want to take back control of their lives.
Oh, that's why the book, like I'll tell you a book I recommend my clients is Why Men Love Bitches. And I always say bitch stands for a babe in total control of herself. And what I appreciate that book for women is that it's an empowerment book, not to compromise who you are as a person. Because the one thing that what I think Hollywood used to portray is somewhat, not always, a submissive role for women. I'm not an advocate for that. That doesn't work long term. It might work in the short term. What I'm advocating is that you have healthy standards and have healthy boundaries, not just in the dating process, in the relationship process, because the one thing, man or woman, you should never compromise who you are to actually hope that that will create a successful relationship. Show up in your empowerment, because that's far more attractive in the long run than being a submissive or being a overly masculine man and not actually have emotional maturity to lean into a long-term relationship.
Well, I'm not going to get into it with you about the idea of masculinity being synonymous with toxicity, because I believe virtuous masculinity.
Yeah.
But lest we go down too many rabbit holes in the midst of one conversation here, I will agree with you that women in movies in the past have taken a submissive role. One of the tropes that I wanted to talk about, and I know that kind of is a word with negative connotation attached. It's an emotionally loaded word, but one of the Hollywood stock characters, if you will, is the manic pixie dream girl. Yeah. Men love this chick. She's cute, fun, lives in the moment, and basically will sacrifice her own goals to help the man who's the object of her esteem in any particular movie reach his. And he's grateful, and they live happily ever after, and she's cute and sweet and fun and lightens him up when he's feeling down.
Yeah.
I married one of those women who's happy to be one of those women. I would also argue that the nature of masculinity and femininity, I would put forward the opinion, and I have people argue with me about this, but I know it's worked for me forever. Masculinity protects and provides and leads. We take care of the necessities towards the base of the Maslowian hierarchy of needs, so that when women have fear lifted from their being, when they feel safe, when they feel provided for. And again, this isn't excusing or even tolerating some kind of toxic feminine reaction from a woman. When's the last time you heard the phrase toxic femininity, right? You haven't. But when a woman expects a man to give her millions and it's never enough and he just needs to keep giving and she's a gold digger and she's selfish, well, that's broken. But when a man has provided a safe sandbox where a woman doesn't feel threatened anymore, where she feels safe, then all of a sudden the beautiful feminine gifts that we all live for, which make life wonderful and joyous and fun, playfulness, fun, joy, comfort, all of those things come through. And I've noticed that when a man isn't selfish, when he makes decisions in the best interest of those he loves, and women feel more comfortable, then it doesn't feel like this patriarchal abusive relationship anymore that we hear so famously talked about in the media. It's what's going on by design. It's what's supposed to happen. Now, there are plenty of women who want to make their own decisions. There are plenty of women who are captains of industry, and that's all well and good. I mean, my wife has her own agency in this family. She makes wonderful decisions. She has wonderful ideas. And I am all about those ideas a lot of the time. But at a primal attraction level, she loves the fact that I make her feel safe. Now, Hollywood, like I said, has a script for all occasions. There are movies where this comes off in a horribly toxic way, where the woman is abused and, beaten up. And, there's a lot of movies like that. And a lot of women can resonate with those movies. There are also a lot of movies where it's demonstrated in a way that if guys had the lights on and paid attention, you would be a lot better at attracting a lot more women if you played along. But alas, if there are no plot complications in a movie, it makes for a very boring movie. Fair enough, which is why we're all here. I do want to briefly circle back and comment on what you talked about in terms of online dating.
Yeah.
The way online dating is designed nowadays is for women to collect all the love from all the men who will literally swipe right on anything that walks. I mean, men are making the first move. Even Bumble is a lot like playing Jeopardy. The shtick there, the gimmick, if you will, is that women make the first move once there's a match. And on paper, that sounds really empowering for women. Yet what the guys tell me is every woman goes, hi, or what are you looking for? The latter, of course, elicits the Homer Simpson reaction. Oh, I guess I'm looking for a relationship. No, well, she wants you to tell her the kind of woman you're looking for to see if she matches up with it or not. Women are famously tight-lipped about what they're like, what they're looking for, because they don't want guys rising up to meet that description of who she is. Like, oh, sure, I love, shoe shopping and putting on lipstick on weekends just so he can get in her pants. So women are going to shut up about it. So it's part of the natural masculine feminine dance, in my estimation, that men are doing all the swiping and women are doing all the, getting swiped on. Now, the problem with online dating is a woman gets 200 likes and thinks all of those men have uniquely chosen her, like she's some kind of Disney princess, even though she's very average in every way. Then she selects her 3 Disney princes from those 200 guys, and meanwhile, she's the 10th or 11th or 50th choice on the part of all 11 of those guys who've long since moved on to someone they actually liked better, and nobody ever meets. And even if they do meet in real life, they look at each other like the Spider-Man meme and point at each other going, you're not who you said you were. You don't look like your pictures, and you and I just aren't getting along. Kind of like back to that movie, The Two-Night Stand, where these two people meet each other and they don't even know who they're meeting. That's the problem with online dating nowadays, which is why, regardless of what's put forth in those articles, like the one we mentioned earlier, I think people should get back out there and meet people in real life again. Go old school. What a concept.
I'm in full agreement with that, that it would be great if we actually met on an organic level. Before I met my beloved, and we actually met through a dating site, Match.com.
As did we, but years ago.
And so what I've observed is I lived in a condo complex at that time with, 600 units. I barely knew any of my neighbors. The perfect woman could have been at the balcony across from me, and I didn't even know she existed. So one of the challenges is to actually be seen and connect with single eligible people. And this is becoming increasingly more difficult. And certainly the pandemic made that even more difficult. There's no doubt about it. So what's happened is, and I'm not an advocate for this because I'm truly an advocate for meeting organically, the online world happens to be where most people are meeting. And I just wanted to comment on Bumble for a second, because I'm in full agreement with you. When two people connect and the best she can say is hi, I liked the concept of Bumble only in the sense that it was a woman dropping the hanky, so to speak, by her making the initial move kind of thing. Because you're right, she's got 20 or 200 likes, then she drops the hanky. I would prefer if human beings, men and women alike, because men can be just as bad at this, is they actually could put together a sentence or two when their first communication instead of just hi. I would wish that would occur, but sadly it does not. Secondly, with online dating, and this is something I see habitually, is that most people put a terrible representation of themselves. I can't stand the women who have the Snapchat filters as half of their photographs, or sunglasses, or a picture of them with 20 people in the group, and you can't figure out who the person is. What I think the real need is that you actually have to think about marketing yourself. And I don't mean this in some sales perspective, or advertising perspective, but if you were going to go and get the job of your dreams, you would put together the best resume and you'd buy the best outfit for that. That's the way I would prefer every human being approach the online dating process, is the way you would if you were going to try to get your dream job. Sadly, most people don't do that.
Well, I used to be extremely bullish on online dating. My wife and I met online. I believed in it. Nowadays, not so much because of.
I'm in it. By the way, me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
And what I universally recommend to both men and women is to resist the pull of the apps. That vapidity, the swipe right, swipe left.
Vapidity. That's a good one.
Split second decision. And go to the long form sites. Go to Match.com and actually look at women who took the time to put several pictures up there and who wrote a profile, and let your gut tell you who you might get along with, and actually write a real email to those people. Because the people who are looking for an actual connection, instead of just looking to have their dopamine receptors packed to the gills with more likes, are on those sites still.
Scott, I want to share something with you. You said something so critically important to this conversation. I believe the mobile app dating sites have bastardized the actual connective process. I do believe I think AOL Personals and Yahoo Personals were the first two big sites that came out there, and then Match.com took them over. I appreciate what you just said, because it's actually writing a more established essay, filling out way more boxes about who you are, can help determine if two people are a better fit for one another by having more details and by actually having more quality photographs and that sort of thing. Because you met your wife through an online dating site. I met my beloved through an online dating site. In fact, most of my circle of friends who are in a relationship, and they're all in their 40s plus, have met through an online connection. This is their second, go around. What I mean is a lot of divorced people. I think the apps, because of that dopamine hit you mentioned, has actually bastardized the process. And I think what's occurring is a true lack of what's the word I'm thinking of? Not sensitivity, but,
serendipity.
Care. Well, there's not, but I think it's more about, genuine respect for another human being. That's what I think the swipe apps have eliminated, and it's caused human beings to even be less respectful. I'm not saying always, I'm just noticing a drop in actual care and respect for another human being.
Well, the trend online is pure selfishness. I mean, you got a bunch of men watching HD online porn, where certainly the chick on the screen isn't owed anything from you. You're getting your rocks off. It's pure self-gratification.
Yeah.
Women are getting on Instagram and collecting likes. Women are getting OnlyFans accounts and putting themselves out there pornographically, and then wondering why they can't go on a date and have any guy respect them. I mean, you and I both read those articles before. Yeah. And you're like, well, honey, wake up. Garbage in, garbage out. So you have a bunch of people living a fantasy world, and then they present themselves on an online dating app, well, for lack of a better word, fictitiously. They don't represent who they are. They don't even want to represent who they are. They just want to get what they want, and the way they perceive themselves as having their best chance of getting that is to trick everybody else or rope them in, or, let's just throw it on the table again. Do I even want to meet a real person? I really just want to feel good about myself. It's all pure self-absorption. Now, when someone actually wants to meet someone and they get it in terms of what a relationship looks like, they represent themselves accurately, because, if you don't, you're going to get exactly what you asked for, which is someone who wanted someone different than who you really are. I mean, it seems almost obvious laughably so when you put it in plain English. But what happens is the people who want a relationship, the people who understand I'd like to have another person to share my life with, you have to almost look hard for those people. You have to almost dare yourself to even walk up to them and meet them in public. I don't know about where you live, but I can go to the grocery store on a Saturday afternoon and I will see 24 attractive women dressed in yoga clothes. Not one of them has sweated in the last hour and a half. They're there because they know they look cute. They would like someone who is of their liking to approach and meet them, yet nobody does.
Well, and I'll be candid with you because, and not that this sounds like a brag, but I'm 6'2", full head of hair. I'm in the baby boom age bracket, and I only say, and my hair I haven't even gone gray yet. Okay, so I would be considered in that top percentile of men that women are attracted to. When I'm at the grocery store, I don't walk up to a stranger, not because I'm afraid to walk up to a stranger, but most of the time, if I'm looking at them purely based on looks, then, I get that's our natural instinct to approach someone we feel physical attraction. I don't know their status. I don't know if they're married. I don't know if they're in a relationship with someone. So unless there's actually, like some sort of socialized aspect that allows for conversation. And again, I'm not fearful to walk up to someone and say, hi. I just don't do it because I don't know what their status is. And I'm just saying this as a man, in the over 45 category versus in my 20s, I'd walk up to every random woman because I just assumed that they were single. I'm just giving you some perspective of someone who's a bit older that probably doesn't approach women.
Well, I'm a married man, happily.
Yeah.
And I approach everybody. I coach my guys to talk to women, whether you're attracted to them or not, and not have an agenda tied to it. And the next thing you know, as you get better at talking to real women in the real world, then on the occasion one of those women is actually available, it'll be a natural segue to talking about that aspect of it.
Yeah.
Now, I would also love to interject into this conversation that men who are seeing women as visual representations of a sexual conquest are already stacking the deck against themselves. And let's go back to movies.
Oh, I would totally agree.
Yeah, let's go back to movies. The movies that I believe do the best job of accurately portraying healthy male-female attraction, accurate, legitimate male-female attraction, are the ones where there's an acknowledgement of the other person's energy and who they are, some depth to them. There's a connection there. I used the word serendipity earlier. There's a great John Cusack movie called Serendipity. It's got some silly plot complications, which of course they have to. But all of these rom-coms, every Jennifer Lopez rom-com ever, all of them come down to, I'm a good-looking person, you're a good-looking person, we're attractive to each other, but we also connect to each other. There may be a severe disconnect somewhere, but they repair it and they move on from it. Every John Hughes movie with Molly Ringwald in it is about class warfare. And, James Spader is in it and he's always a douchebag. James Spader is such a wonderful actor, by the way. But, all these movies like, all these John Hughes movies, there's an unexpected twist to who is actually attractive in that movie and why. Remember, Ali Sheedy in The Breakfast Club has got no sense of style or social skill at all, and they turn her into a beauty queen by the end. And there's another John Hughes movie, a little bit more obscure, called Some Kind of Wonderful, where the main male protagonist is in love with, thinks he's in love with this beauty queen. And meanwhile, his female friend, who's played by a young Mary Stuart Masterson, who I had the hugest crush on. I mean, this whole movie, I'm telling this guy, open your eyes, dude. She's so much cuter and sweeter and better than this other woman. And at the end, he finally does have his eyes opened. And this woman, this girl, who he's always had this connection with, has always been right before his very eyes. And yet, because she wasn't strange, she wasn't interesting enough to him for the entire movie. I mean, these things happen in movies, and it's about the connection, and it's about the depth, and it's about finally sensing someone's energy. And I think you can do that in real life. I think if you're going to a grocery store and you see a woman, you can say, oh, well, she's good looking. I'd like to bend her over and have a piece of that. But sometimes there's just the way she carries herself, the way she's moving, the way the way you overhear her talking to someone else, just her facial expressions. And you get this inkling, that's a woman who might be one of me. She might be on my team. I think she and I could get along. Sometimes there's fashion cues.
Well, we could go on and on and on about this. And there's no doubt that a woman who has that energy of invitation, that energy of, it's okay to connect with me, then certainly that's great to experience that. I'm just observing that it's becoming increasingly more difficult, which requires probably more skills to actually either have the confidence to walk up to someone or at least the communication skills to engage in a conversation with a total stranger. Again, I'm not dissing Hollywood when we began this podcast. I just believe that Hollywood could do a much better representation of what's really out there versus the escape or fantasy of what's out there. That's just my opinion on this.
Well, I think that's fair enough. I also think probably a lot of us guys would do well to watch some older movies and see how real interaction with real women goes. I mean, possibly, even if it's a fantastic version of it, there's enough in there about how to attract a woman by being charming and by being masculine, where it would be better than the complete dearth of skills most men are exhibiting now. So that's my last word.
No doubt.
Anyway, this has been a fantastic conversation. Time is running short here. So, gentlemen, I want to send you to Jonathon Aslay's YouTube channel, which you can reach by searching his name on YouTube, JONATHON ASLAY on YouTube, or you can simply go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Aslay, ASLAY, and get magically teleported over to that YouTube channel. Jonathon, what a great wide-ranging conversation. Man, we covered so much.
Thanks,
Thank
Scott.
you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah, 100%, man. Come on back anytime. You're a smart guy and you know a lot about this stuff, and that always makes for a great conversation. Gentlemen, if you have not headed to mountaintoppodcast.com lately, you can now get a free copy of my first book, Deserve What You Want, which has been selling for $37 all day long on my website for years and years now. It's yours free when you join my mailing list. When you get on my mailing list, I'll send you actionable ways to be better with women and be a better man every day in your inbox. Hey, this will be fluff free. It's a lot of content I'm sending you free of charge. Also, some of you guys have not talked to me yet for 25 minutes for free. Use the red button at the upper right-hand corner of mountaintoppodcast.com to get on my schedule, and we'll talk about where you are, what your goals are with women, and maybe put a plan together to get you there. Also, visit our wonderful sponsors, Origin in Maine, Hero Soap, and Keyport. Links to all three of those sponsors are on the website as well. It's all there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.